United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says they are ready to work constructively with Donald Trump's administration. The Republican won the White House, securing more than 270 electoral votes needed to defeat the Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris. According to data, Trump won over half of the 50 U.S. states, including 4 key battlegrounds: Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, as well as Wisconsin. In a statement, Guterres says that he commends the people of the U.S. for their active participation in the democratic process. Meanwhile, Harris has committed to ensure a peaceful transition of power following the electoral defeat. The Democratic presidential candidate delivered a speech conceding the election to Donald Trump.
Now, I know folks are feeling and experiencing a range of emotions right now. I get it. But we must accept the results of this election. Earlier today, I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition, and that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power.
Well, let's get some reaction now from Georgia this morning. Civil rights activist and Atlanta City Council and the current managing director of a Black Futurist group, Devin Barrington-Ward, is joining us live from Atlanta. Very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. I'm listening into what Kamala Harris had to say now about feelings. How do you feel about the election results and what has come out, and how Americans in general have elected and decided on Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think, as a progressive, there is feelings of disappointment. I think that disappointment is one we recognize that, President-elect Trump has, not necessarily been anything close to being a progressive president. Many of the policies that he supports are quite regressive, particularly around women's health, LGBTQ issues, and racial issues in general. Doesn't necessarily have economic policies that we can really point to say that, these are things that are absolutely going to help the American people. He's, most notably stated in the presidential debates with VP Harris that he had a concept of a plan. And so many of us are concerned about what will the realities of this presidency bring for working class people, for people who are not a part of, the wealthiest 1% in this country, who benefited, extremely during President Trump's presidency. And that wasn't necessarily the case for working class people. I think also, being a part of some of the groups that he's targeted with this bombastic rhetoric, such as Haitian American immigrants and others, are concerned about how that rhetoric will eventually inform his public policy once he takes his oath of office and takes over the White House.
Well, considering that particular analysis, specifically when it comes to minority groups, what do you read into what played out in Georgia specifically, Trump managing to secure the 16 electoral college votes there? So you have the minority groups in Georgia as well, but it seems that some of those in the minority groups were willing to give Trump another chance.
Well, there was some in the minority groups, particularly Hispanic voters in Georgia and in other parts of the country, who did decide to vote for Donald Trump. But I think other racial groups, such as African Americans, held their numbers very close to the numbers in which they supported President Biden in 2020. And so I think not all minority groups are monolithic. And so there were some groups that, despite, Donald Trump's rhetoric that has been quite, just downright racist towards, immigrants, towards Latino people, some people were able to overlook that and decided to vote for him based on these concepts of plans that haven't really been fleshed out. And some misnomers about what was Donald Trump's accomplishments while he was in the White House. I think one of the challenges is that Elected officials, politicians like Donald Trump, profit off of people's political ignorance. And so we had people who were making decisions in a U.S. presidential election, and many of whom don't even have an understanding of how the governmental system in the United States works, can't name the three branches of government. And so, there are some concerns about, the ways in which the electorate was engaged in this particular election, particularly with all of the, well-documented cases of misinformation that was coming from foreign sources and sources within the United States, particularly those attached to the Republican Party, that, we see an electoral map where we have people who are making decisions about the presidential election without all the facts. That has ramifications at the ballot box.
Yeah, some of the critique or criticism that has come out of this elections, as well as the election campaign, specifically when it comes to Kamala Harris, is of course one. She came late to the race because of what was decided at a later stage that Biden will pull out. So that is the one aspect. But then the campaign messaging itself, some are saying that it was more around fear-mongering and not necessarily what Kamala Harris and the Democrats have to offer Americans. What's your take on that? And also, of course, considering the state of the economy, which has been doing well, but on some parts, when it comes to inflation, the impact that it has had on households.
Well, I think, when it comes to the inflation issue, there were policies that the Biden administration was able to pass while they were in office that were quite popular. I think one of the challenges is that the Democratic Party in general has a messaging issue. In addition to that, I think they, I've stated on this network before, I believe last year, that I had some concerns about their ability to keep together the coalition that helped get them elected in 2020. That was when Biden was the nominee. But I had those same concerns once Harris became the nominee as well, because one, the war in Gaza and, the United States stance that, essentially has allowed Israel to continue to engage in a very dangerous war campaign that has cost the lives of, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, turned off a lot of progressive voters in the United States, but particularly a lot of young voters. And so I think there was some missed opportunities there for the administration to reject the policies that were taking place in Israel against Palestinians. Because, for example, we saw that a massive amount of Arab Americans in Michigan decided to either stay home or vote for Donald Trump out of, frustration and a rejection of the Harris-Biden administration stance on, the conflict in the Middle East and Gaza and how it has impacted Palestinians. So I think that's another issue as well. As it pertains to, the Democratic Party in general, I would say that many of us, particularly those who are consider ourselves to be a part of the more progressive wing of the party, were very disappointed that it was this late in the game that the administration made this switch, because it is hard for a candidate to get the type of momentum needed that late in the game to really run an effective campaign. And the fact that this election was not necessarily a blowout. When you look at the results and you see that, Donald Trump didn't necessarily win by a landslide, particularly in some of these battleground states. Yeah. And so I think that's a testament to, kind of the poor planning on the Democratic Party by picking, a nominee this late because of the situation around President Biden's health and mental fitness. One of the challenges that I had was that, when Biden ran in 2020, he talked about how he would be a transition president, how he kind of understood that because of his age, it would be unlikely for him to be able to run for 2 terms. And so I was very confused as to why these conversations were not taking place in 2022 or in 2023. And so I think that was a major misstep on the part of the Democratic Party.
Well, certainly. And speaking about the coalitions, for instance, in Georgia, that secured Biden that victory in Georgia. What happened to Stacey Abrams? Because she was quite key during that campaigning period. But during this particular campaigning period, it's almost like her voice was absent.
Well, I think that I know I saw Leader Abrams on the ground working in communities throughout the state to, turn out the vote, to, build on the machine, the groundwork that she laid by even being able to make Georgia a place that is competitive. Georgia is truly a swing state. And part of the reasons why it's a swing state is one, just based on pure demographics alone. There has been a major demographic shift, especially within the last 2 election cycles. And so because of that, Georgia is now in play for, the Democratic Party, but that doesn't mean that it's a state that can be taken for granted. And, I think that while Harris came to the state quite often, the investment of the Democratic Party into that year-round organizing with people, that year-round conversations around what are the concerns of working class people throughout the state, I would say was missing. And it was a missed opportunity to really be able to have a cohesive base, regardless of who the nominee was. And so I think that, the party and party leaders will have to do a postmortem on this election and see where there were some missteps. But I can personally attest to the fact that I saw Leader Abrams out at several get out the vote rallies. I think there is a difference between seeing people on cable news in the United States talking about the election and people on the ground organizing in communities that they're very familiar with. And I believe Leader Abrams was a part of that effort.
Devin, thank you so much for your time. Devin Barrington-Ward, the civil rights activist joining us from Atlanta.